Hello and welcome to an introduction to programming using Visual Basic exercises for beginners. In this exercise we are going to create a caffeine absorption calculator. After caffeine is absorbed into the body, 13% is eliminated from the body each hour. Assume a person drinks 8-ounce cup of coffee containing 130 milligrams of caffeine, and caffeine is absorbed immediately into the body. Write a program to calculate the following. 1. The number of hours required until 65 milligrams, 1/2 of the original amount, remains in body. 2. The amount of caffeine in the body 24 hours after the person drinks the coffee. And 3. Let's suppose that the person drinks a cup of coffee at 7 a.m. and then drinks a cup of coffee at the end of each hour until 7 a.m. next day. How much caffeine will be in the body at the end of the 24 hours? Here is a form. There is actually no input. We will simply click the Calculate Values button and everything will be calculated using functions and sub-procedures. So once the button is clicked, the calculated values will display in the appropriate text boxes. So I'm in Visual Studio 2015. Let's start coding. I'll double-click the button and go to the button click event. But first thing, I'm going to create a constant. We know that the caffeine per cup contains 130 milligrams, so we can put that in a constant. And we also know it absorbs 13% per hour, so we can put that into a constant as well. Alright, so here's my two constants. I'm using 0.13 instead of 13% because we are going to use it in calculations, and obviously 1 will be 100% and 0.13 is 13%. So since we have 3 questions, I'm going to create 3 functions and each of them will calculate answer to one of the questions. So I'll just name them questions 1, question 2 and question 3. So here are my functions. The first one returns an integer because we are calculating the number of hours, and the other two, they are returning milligrams. In other words, we will be calculating doubles or decimal numbers. So now I can actually call these functions even though I don't have anything calculated yet. I can go to my button click event and just call each of these functions, and returned value will be placed straight into the appropriate text box. So the question 1 will be placed into the text box 1, question 2 into text box 2, and 3 into text box 3. So here's my text boxes. I'm calling the function and then converting everything that was calculated into a string and then formatting it into a number. The first one is a number with 0 decimal places because we calculate in the hours. The other two are just numbers, and by default they will return 2 decimal places because we are returning the milligrams or doubles. Alright, so let's start the calculation. The first thing to calculate is the number of hours required until 65 milligrams, or 1/2 of the original amount, remains in body. So I'll go to my question 1 function and I'm going to declare 2 variables. One will be integers for the hours, that's what's going to be returned from this function, and one will be the amount of caffeine that will be changing as we loop through it. Now the starting amount is equal to the 130 milligrams because that's our given number per this assignment. So our amount, or initial value of the amount, will equal the caffeine per cup value, which is 130. I could just type 130 here. However, I'm using the constant simply because we can easily change the value right here and it would change throughout the whole form. So the next thing to do is to loop through the amount until the caffeine per cup is 50%. So we will use the do until loop, and we will loop through the amount, and we will loop until it is less or equal to the caffeine per cup divided by 2. That gives us 50%. Again, I could just type 65, but if our caffeine per cup changes, then I don't have to come into these functions, and I can just change the constant. And within the loop, I'm going to calculate the amount as it changes with each iteration of the loop. So our amount equals, and since we are calculating 13% per hour, and 100% would be 1, so I will do 1 minus the absorbed, which is the 0.13. In other words, after 1 hour, there's 87% of caffeine left in the body. But I'm using a calculation like this rather than just typing 0.87 again in case we decide to change the numbers later. And we will multiply that by the amount that is currently there. In other words, it's 0.87 multiplied by the amount and assigned back to the amount variable. So once we have our amount calculated, it comes back over here and compares the condition. Is it still less than 50%? And if it is, it goes to another iteration. Now one thing we need to do, obviously, is to calculate the hours, and with each iteration is 1 hour added. In other words, each iteration represents an hour. So our hours plus equal 1. So once it hits the condition and it's no longer true, it exits the loop and we can return the hours. And the return value will be passed to our txt1.txt. So now we can calculate the question number 2, and it's the amount of caffeine in the body 24 hours after the person drinks the coffee. So in my question number 2 function, I will declare another amount, and just like before, the initial value will be the caffeine per cup. In this function we are returning the amount, so we don't need the hours, we don't need any other variable, we can go straight to the loop. And I'm going to use a for loop, so I will do for, and we'll start with I equals 1 because we calculate in every hour, so every iteration will represent an hour, and we'll loop until 24 hours is reached. And with each iteration we will calculate the amount, so our amount will equal, and just like before, it's 1 minus the absorbed, which is the 13% per hour, and we will multiply it by the amount. And the result of the calculation will be passed to the amount, and then in the next iteration it will change again based on the value of amount being calculated or multiplied with in this iteration. And after the loop, once again we can return, and we'll returning the amount. And question number 3 says, suppose the person drinks a cup of coffee 7 a.m. and then drinks a cup of coffee at the end of each hour until 7 a.m. the next day. How much caffeine will be in the body at the end of the 24 hours? So this is similar like number 2, but we will be adding another cup to the calculation, because with each hour, person will drink another cup. So we can just use a for loop like we did before. However, I'm going to use a while loop just to kind of vary it, but for loop would work just fine, if not even better. But we'll still need the amount variable that will equal the caffeine per cup, just like before. And since I'm going to be using the while loop, I need a counter, which is an integer, and its initial value will be 1, because we are starting with the 1 hour. So we will do a while, and we are calculating until 24 hours is reached. So until our counter is less or equal to 24, we will perform the same calculation like before. I'll just copy paste it. However, like I said, the user drinks another cup, so we will add to it another cup of coffee, which is the caffeine per cup. And after each iteration we need to increase the counter, so we'll do counter plus equals 1. So that will, in the next iteration it would be 2, then 3 and 4 until it reaches 24. And when that happens, we will return the amount. Alright, so these are our functions. Let's run it. And when I click the calculate values, I get question number 1 is 5 hours. In other words, 5 hours later, there's still 50% of the caffeine. Then number 2 is 4.6 milligrams. That's how much caffeine is going to be left after 24 hours. But if the person keeps drinking another cup of coffee every hour, then after 24 hours, there will be still 969.24 milligrams left. So this is working correctly. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next video.